Thank you. Thank you all, witnesses. Uh, Ms. Bailey, New Jersey has some of the toughest housing challenges of any state in the country. A new report by Adam Data Solutions shows that of the 50 U.S. counties whose housing markets are most vulnerable to the impact of COVID pandemic, 8 of them are in New Jersey. One of those is Essex County, home to the city of Newark, where nearly two-thirds of renters are paying more than 30% of their income towards rent, according to a recent Rutgers University report. These and other statistics suggest that after the current moratoria ends, we might be facing an eviction and foreclosure wave even worse than what we saw in the Great Recession. The American Rescue Plan that Congress just passed includes one of my major priorities, $100 million in housing counseling funding that can help renters and homeowners avoid a worst-case scenario. What impact will this new housing counseling funding have on preventing evictions and foreclosures?
It will go a great deal, and thank you for the question. We have to be honest, servicers are not housing counselors. We know that people who get pre and post housing counseling actually perform much better in home ownership. So the $100 million that you pushed for in the last bill will go a great way in really helping those communities get the kind of information that they need to really weather this economic calamity and be able to hold on to their homes. It's money that's definitely needed and money that will help us avoid that cliff of foreclosures that we've talked about. It will just keep them far, far away.
Is it my connection or hers?
It's hers.
I appreciate that. You know, the plan also requires that at least 40% of housing counseling funding go to minority or low-income households. Do you believe this targeted funding can help ensure that the COVID economic recovery is a more equitable one than the 2008 crisis?
Indeed, as I stated earlier, foreclosures happened in Black and Latino communities in 2006, far sooner than any of the relief showed up. We also know that Black and Latino families were disproportionately steered into risky and toxic mortgage loans, even when the data showed that they qualified for loans that were cheaper and more affordable. In fact, I believe there was a research piece that was published by the Wall Street Journal that showed that up to 80% of those families actually qualified for mortgage loans that were much cheaper than the ones that they actually ended up receiving. As a result of people in our communities receiving these disproportionate levels of toxic and risky mortgages, we've seen a disproportionate amount of foreclosures, and we've seen communities really suffer from losing a whole $1 trillion of wealth as a result of those foreclosures being disproportionately in communities. So having these resources in the hands of housing counselors who actually are closest to the members of the communities, the people who are going to naturally get the first phone call for help, will go a long way in giving our community members access to people who can really help them weather this economic challenge and get the answers and solutions that they need.
Thank you for that. As we consider ways to work out of the current crisis and ensure a sustainable and equitable recovery, we need to start thinking, I think, about how we coordinate housing and transit development so that our communities can improve economic resiliency, expand transportation and housing options, and promote job creations for all segments of our society. We had a great example of this after the last recession when in my home state, we had something called the Hudson-Bergen Light Rail System that came online to connect the North Jersey communities of Bayonne, Jersey City, Hoboken, Weehawken, Union City, North Bergen. That project revitalized the region, spread and spurred new development and helped local businesses. It was a catalyst for economic growth and brought new jobs to the neighborhoods along the line. So I'd like to ask Dr. Herbert, do you think this type of coordinated development is important when considering the various challenges and preferences, for example, of seniors who may rely on transit for their independence, low-income located with transit that helps them get to work, and millennials, many of who want to drive less and live in more walkable communities?
Absolutely, Senator, and thank you for the question. Particularly when you mentioned seniors, the need to have accessible housing so that people who can't drive can get access to services, amenities, and family and friends is critical. And certainly, given the issues around climate change and the need to reduce our carbon footprint, having housing that is accessible to transit and tying development of our transit system to housing development is critically important. Earlier, I mentioned the idea that to the extent that we do invest in transit, if we can tie that to localities having requirements about making density allowable in those communities in order to get access to the funding, would go a long way to make sure housing is tied to transit.
Well, thank you. I have legislation called livable communities, and it's exactly the concept behind it. And I look forward to exploring it with the chairman and my colleagues in the committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Menendez.